Hey everybody, this is Ryan McClanahan with historythroughcards.com. I hope you're all doing very well today. In this video, I want to tell you about the life and career of Tony Latone. He was a running back with the Pottsville Maroons from 1925 to 1930, and he was really one of the only men that Red Grange feared. Grange just did not want to face this guy on a field, and I want to tell you about his story. Now, Latone, he does have a single card from his playing days, a 1926 Pottsville Maroons team issued postcard. These things are extremely rare. I've only seen them in magazines, but I've never seen one in person. And the Pottsville Maroons are a really special team. They won the 1925 championship, but it was stripped from them, and it hasn't been relinquished to that city and that club, which it no longer exists. The club actually they didn't fold per se. They moved to Boston and became the Bulldogs in I believe 1929 or 1928, and then uh, they eventually they did fold, but there was another team that took its place in Boston in I believe 1932. That was the Braves, the Boston Braves, which became the Boston Redskins, which eventually turned into the Washington Redskins. So that's I guess a different story, but you can see kind of like the lineage there that goes back to Pottsville. Um, I think he's got a really interesting case for the Hall of Fame, but I'm going to actually tell you the reason why he probably won't get in the Hall of Fame, even considering that he had only 6 years 6 years as a player. But I'll get into that after I get into there's two articles that I want to read to you guys about Tony Latone, and I think you're going to find these really interesting. Here we go. This is from the Wilkes-Barre Times Leader, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, November 8th, 1928. Tony Latone has fine record with Pottsville 11, given credit for being greatest line plunger in professional ranks. Tony Latone, Edwardsville coal miner whose football ability won him a place as one of the leading professional line plungers in the United States, has not slipped any although the years are advancing rapidly. Reports from Green Bay certainly indicate that the former Edwardsville resident is playing a great professional game. Walter S. Farquhar, sports editor of the Pottsville Journal, states the following about Latone in his sportstorial. Reports from Green Bay would seem to indicate that Tony Latone played a good game. The correspondent in Wisconsin wrote, Green Bay fans have read much about the great line plunging of Tony Latone, and some of the publicity was taken with the proverbial grain of salt, but by his stellar performance today, he proved himself to be the greatest line plunger who ever set a cleated foot on the local field. Let it be said right here that all line plungers of the National League have set foot on Green Bay's field, not only this season but for some years back. It was only natural that Green Bay should feel that way about it because it was the first time Tony ever appeared there. He is the best plunger when his line gives him any kind of a break. In 1924, 1925, and 1926, such performances as the Green Bay sports writer told were common for Tony. It was the thing he was expected to do when opponents got wise to it, placing 7 and 11 8-men on the line. They usually stopped him, but made room for a winning forward pass in some instances. Many spectators missed the feature and failed to give Tony his just deserts. For a time in Pottsville, it was bad form to praise Latone because it aroused animosity on the part of some of those who paved the way for him. This had two effects: one, to deprive Latone of what was due to him; two, to lose games for Pottsville. Whereupon we rise to remark, if a man isn't in a game to open holes for another, what is he in for? And it wouldn't matter if Latone himself were a poor inference runner, which he is not. As unfortunate thing about Latone is that he never played a conspicuous game on Frankfurt's field. From the very start, the Yellow Jackets have been wise to him, and always they have had a defense collated to stop him. 7 men on the line and that sort of thing. They will stop him again next Saturday for several reasons, but they will not do so if two other features of Pottsville's attack go right. That is the injustice of football. When one thing succeeds, it makes prospects better for everything else. There is no compensation doubt. There are several reasons, which we will not state, why Frankfurt will stop Latone, but that doesn't make him any less of a line plunger in the estimation of those who weigh cause and effect. This is from the Times Leader, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, November 1st, 1975. Playing career of Tony Latone recalled. National football history occurred in 1925 and had as one of its main characters Tony Latone, a Kingston native now residing in the Detroit area. The incident was centered around the NFL playoff game that year between the Chicago Cardinals and the Pottsville Maroons, the team for which Latone starred as fullback. The Maroons easily defeated the Cardinals 21-7 and became the world champions of the 6-year-old NFL. The title was taken away from the Pottsville squad, however, when 2 weeks later the Maroons played the Four Horsemen of Notre Dame: Stuttleher, Miller, Crawley, and Layden, and graduating Irish gritters. The contest, won by the Maroons 9-7, cost them their world championship after a protest was lodged by a rival Pottsville team, the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets. The 78-year-old Latone, who starred in that ill-fated game, still maintains local ties through Pete Uraska, 162 South Meade Street, Wilkes-Barre, a running mate of Latone in younger days. Uraska remembers Latone as 5-Yard Tony when he was a star with the Lithuanian Knights, a ragtag bunch of footballers who traveled through the area looking for other teams to play. Uraska was a promoter of the Knights along with the late Joe Lucas Salvage and Jerry Brusock, both from Edwardsville. While the Knights played home games at a field in Kingston, Uraska recalls most of the time they were forced to travel outside of the area into places like Coaldale and Minersville in order to find games. It was during one such excursion in 1924 that Latone made the switch from the Knights to the Maroons. The local team was playing at Pottsville when the Maroons coach, Dick Roush, saw Latone play and offered him $100 a game. Latone excelled with the Pottsville team and in 1924 aided them to a 10-2 record. That record did not help the Maroons hold onto their title when they met the Four Horsemen and Friends at Shibe Park, later Connie Mack Stadium, in the second week of December. In what was the first pro versus college all-star game ever held, the Maroons were down 7-0 when they came out of the second half. A Philadelphia newspaper described Latone's performance in the game after the Maroons scored a touchdown but failed to make the extra point. He, Latone, took the ball once for 11 yards of tackle. He took the ball again right through the same hole and another first down. Then he had to make 3 drives for his third consecutive first down. The Notre Dame secondary defense came up and plugged the hole, but they couldn't stop him. He plowed through again and again, making 2 more first downs, and stopped at the last when he had carried the ball to Notre Dame's 17-yard line, and right there Pottsville switched its tactics and tried end running. Those end runs were apparently not successful, and Maroon Field goal kicker Charlie Berry booted, one to give the Maroons a 9-7 victory. So next time you hear the Four Horsemen of Notre Dame, the same players who accounted for the famous line outlined against the blue-gray October sky, the Four Horsemen rode again. Remember, a local player proved a worthier steed. So there have been a few instances of a petition to reinstate the Maroons into the 1925 champions, and the first was in 1963, and the second that I'm aware of was a few years ago, and both of them they didn't even touch. The NFL didn't even touch. They didn't want to have anything to do with it, and so it's really kind of a shame too. And the other thing too is that imagine being a Chicago Cardinals player in 1925 and 1926, where you lose the championship and then gain it through secondary means. Like that can't be a good feeling, right? That's got to be like the 1919 Reds, where they knew they weren't the best team on the field, and yet they won the championship because the other team either cheated or something happened, and so like someone else is giving you or handing you the championship, and you know you didn't do a very good job. That I don't think would be I wouldn't like that. I wouldn't accept that if it's me. If I didn't do my all to get that championship, if I didn't perform to my utmost, I wouldn't accept that championship, even despite the fact that the other team may have cheated. I mean, that's just anyway. That's just my thought on it. You guys could have obviously a different thought than me, but here's my thought on Tony Latone. Now, he uh, he probably should be in the Hall of Fame as one of the best of his generation. He's not in there, and I don't expect him to be in there because of the way the Football Hall of Fame is electing its players now. And we actually saw this recently, in fact. So Buddy Parker will have made a case for Hall of Fame induction. He goes through the entire process. Now, Parker's been dead since 1982, and he won back-to-back championships with the Detroit Lions in 52 and 53, and he had a winning record with the Steelers, and he really turned that club around. And then he unexpectedly resigned his position within the Steelers organization. So he's the lone representative as a coach, and they failed to elect him. Now, you could tell me, like, oh, it's just sour grapes, or, it is how it is. Well, here's the thing. Yeah, it could be a little bit of sour grapes here, but when you actually look into this more deeply, you'll notice that he is the second coach who has made it that far and not been elected to the Hall of Fame. It's extremely rare. And this actually was noted by a sports writer, in fact. And I'm going to read to you what he said. All right. This is from Rick Goslin, historian with the Hall of Fame. And he was really surprised that Parker was not in the Hall of Fame. He wasn't elected. And he said, back when we put one senior or two seniors, they were pretty much rubber stamped. But now you've got four basically senior candidates, coach contributor, and senior player candidates. And I think it's easier to reduce one or even two, as we see here. I just think we're losing the history of the game. He's really angry at this. He's really angry. And he's talking about Gradisher. Randy Gradisher was elected to the Hall of Fame. I actually heard about him first through Chris from Stories and Cardboard. Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate that. Um, but Steve McMichael and Art Powell. So McMichael, let's get to him first because he has Lou Gehrig's disease and he was diagnosed in 2021. You can make a case that he's not the greatest enshrinee in the world, but he's really well known and very much well liked within the Chicago Bears. fan base. And so he's elected to the Hall of Fame. Unfortunately for him, he can no longer talk. He can't walk, and uh, he's he's going to pass away. I hate to say this pretty quickly. Lou Gehrig's disease is an awful, awful thing. Um, I don't wish it on anybody. My grandfather actually passed away from it, and so it's just brutal on anybody, especially the person themselves, not just the family members. So uh, you could make the case that the voters of the Football Hall of Fame put him in because they didn't want to endure the wrath of Steve McMichael's wife and family, and that could be legitimate. But the thing is, so he's not the only one where you have a lot of players who have entered the Hall of Fame in their 70s, 80s, in some cases 90s. And unfortunately for McMichael, he can't enjoy this. And, we don't get the satisfaction of hearing McMichael talk about how great it is to be in the Hall of Fame or to be inducted and what his experiences are, thus far. And because, he not only is he robbed, but we are robbed as fans as well, and basically historians. And so you do have a lot of players who have not been able to enjoy the satisfaction of being Hall of Famers. And another example of this came with Chuck Howley last year. Now, Chuck Howley has Alzheimer's, he's got dementia, and he doesn't even know that he's inducted into the Hall of Fame. And so this is what really gets me angry is that there's no reason why you should be electing people to the Hall of Fame in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. And also with Maxie Bogan last year, where he was nominated for the Hall of Fame, the voting process, and he died like 2 days afterwards. He was 86, 87 years old. And so um, they obviously rightfully didn't continue, but um, again, he should be in the Hall of Fame, and he'll get in the Hall of Fame posthumously now. These guys, they should have been inducted into the Hall of Fame years and years ago, and for whatever reason, like the Hall of Fame is either backed up with so many ball players, and we actually know this because with the Professional Football Researchers Association, they've nominated 200 plus ball players that rightfully should be in the Hall of Fame, and um, they're not being basically their cases are not being considered by Canton, and one of the reasons is because there are a lot of very young voters who have never seen these players, and they may not actually be qualified to vote on a lot of these players, and because of their age. And so, like, they also recognize that the Football Hall of Fame voting process needs to change. And if you go back to say 1963 when the Football Hall of Fame opened and they had their first nominees, their selections were from the 1920s and early 30s, and so they got as many of those players into the Hall of Fame as possible. They've forgotten a few actually, but if you've noticed that there's a lot of players who played in the 1940s and 1950s and early 60s that didn't make it into the Hall of Fame until like the late 70s or 1980s or 1990s. And so, um, there's just a huge backlog of players that most likely are not going to get into the Hall of Fame because of this. And so, like, if you actually went back to 1963 and saw the amount of players that were being inducted into the Hall of Fame, then if you had that same number, I think it's like 20, you would now have like 1,020 players in the Hall of Fame. And one thing that really does bother me about this, what was said, was that the Football Hall of Fame is losing its history. Uh, Football is losing its history. I haven't been to Canton, so I don't know. I've heard this, and I've also heard too from a few people that are connected to the Hall of Fame where they don't want players in the Hall of Fame prior to 1980, and that actually is starting to make more and more sense. The other thing too, which is happening, is that because the NFL rules have changed so much, and that you have more games now being played, that the players who played, say, in like the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, those guys, their efforts, what they did in the game in the NFL has been pushed out because of the rules. He's not really well known now, unfortunately, but he's also not considered, and he's never been considered for the Hall of Fame because all these players who played after Billy Houghton, they've kind of dismantled his playing record. And at the time when he was playing, he was really kind of considered as the next Don Hudson, and is, he just destroyed Don Hudson's his record, which does happen. But in both of these cases, in Hudson's case and in Houghton's case, they had the same number of games. Now that there are more games, um, the players who are playing after Houghton, they have a better record because of the rules have changed, and because they have more games to play, and it has destroyed a lot of the chances of the older ball players who rightfully should have been in the Hall of Fame. They can't now get into the Hall of Fame because their records don't look exemplary, right? So that's a huge problem. And so this is one of the reasons why I don't think Tony Latone is going to get into the Hall of Fame. He played 6 years. And Doak Walker played 6 years too, and Doak Walker's in the Hall of Fame. But and obviously it's a different game in say 1928 to like 1950 when Doak Walker played in 55 when he retired. But the simple fact is that something at Canton desperately needs to change in order to get some of these guys into the Hall of Fame. Maybe we should just have the Professional Football Researchers Association handle the voting process, or get historians in there who actually know what they're doing. So I'm fine with both the PRFA to get involved more than they are now. I think they do get a vote for Hall of Fame. The way that the voting is structured now, it doesn't work. It simply does not work at all. So you have three chances to whittle down the list, but again, you're leaving out a lot of senior ball players from the list, and a lot of these guys are saying like we're not going to even consider these guys. I don't think that's right. I don't think it's fair. You don't even have Ralph Hay in the Hall of Fame, and he's the guy who started the professional league, the NFL. He's the guy. He's not even in the Hall of Fame. He got booted from the list this year. I think the year prior to that. So if you don't even have the guy who founded the NFL in the Hall of Fame, what are we doing? Like, really, Jack Cusack, same thing. He's not in the Hall of Fame, and he's a very influential member of the early game. So again, I think things desperately need to change for the Hall of Fame going forward. I think the Hall of Fame itself understands this and acknowledges it, and I think they've said that we've got to change things going forward. Maybe that'll happen. The problem here with Tony Latone, along with other players of his era, are is that the NFL is it's very spotty, right? You have teams playing one game, and then they're canned the next. They're folding like every week. Their statistics are spotty as well. It's a lot like the Negro leagues of baseball. It's not reported on a weekly basis, and it's very difficult to try to find their exact statistics. So you only really can go on historical accounts when they're available. And that's another reason why I don't think a lot of the voters at the Hall of Fame should get involved in the senior committee, if you will, whoever these people are. I have no idea. Again, you have younger and younger voters who have never seen some of these people play or even know what their names are. So that's another problem as well. And it's one thing if you're voting for Julius Peppers, which I know he just got in the Hall of Fame, and congratulations to him and the rest of the guys who got in the Hall of Fame recently. It's one thing to vote on Julius Peppers because you've seen him play enough, but if you haven't seen, obviously you can't see Tony Latone play. He's been dead since 1975, and he last played in 1930. So technically, you shouldn't be voting for the guy unless you're like a historian. Tell me I'm wrong about this. I'm not happy with this at all. I'm really not. The the way that Canton rolls out its voting process, it's wrong. It doesn't fit for 21st century uh, Hall of Fame standards anymore. It can't. It needs to change, and the people who are voting need to change too. Anyway, guys, obviously I'm fired up over this. I'd love to hear what you have to say about Tony Latone or the NFL voting process. I actually did a video on this a while ago. It drew fleas or whatever. Yeah, it's been a long day. I'd also say that this is not morally right either, what they're doing with the voting of these players or not voting. So, like, you also have players like Bobby Dillon, who had just passed away a year prior to his induction, and he waited, what, 50 years for induction because he was on teams that sucked, on Green Bay Packers teams that maybe won like one game in like 1958. That's not his fault. There's other players on that team, and a lot of times it's management, right? So one player doesn't make a team. It's ridiculous. You have a lot of those instances too, where players have waited decades and decades. Jerry Kramer is another example um, from the Green Bay Packers from the same time. But he waited well over 3 or 4 decades to be enshrined, and you have a lot of these cases. So this isn't morally right as far as I'm concerned. I know this isn't the most popular sentiment in the world, what I'm telling you guys today, but you know, I probably have like hitmen from Canton looking for me right now, and you'll probably find me in a dumpster in the back of a baseball card shop afterwards. But like, this has to be said, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this. You don't have to agree with me, obviously, but I'd love to hear what you guys have to say either about Tony Latone, his candidacy, or uh, the lack thereof, or anything that I've said so far about the Football Hall of Fame needing to change. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for stopping by. I greatly appreciate it, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to say, even if it's not good. Just keep it G-rated. That's all I ask. Anyway, guys, I'll talk to you in a future one. Have a good one. Bye.